I just want to do God's will.
The kind of revolution that the world needs is a Christian revolution.
If you want a miracle, you've got to expect it to happen.
You are the recipients of God's grace and God's blessings, and you rejoice in that reality.
Welcome to Life Today Live. I'm Randy Robison, and one thing that's very close to my heart are believers around the world. We can be a little isolated in our bubble wherever you're at, U.S., Canada, in the West, and I am grateful for the freedoms that we have here. But I never want to forget our brothers and sisters who are suffering, sometimes to the point of death, for the gospel in some countries where they don't have what we have. And so today we're gonna look at some of those situations currently. I love doing this periodically. I want to keep it at the forefront of our prayers and our minds, and frankly our finances, to help support those in places that need help, because persecution is real, and those are our brothers and sisters in Christ, wherever they're at. So I'm excited to have Jeff King back on the program. He's the president of Persecuted.org. He hosts the Faith Under Fire podcast. We'll show you a little bit about that in a bit, where you can keep up with what's going on. But I hope you'll pay attention. I know it's a hard topic. You want to have everybody stay home from church, have a missionary weekend. Those poor people out there, and it's so hard sometimes for them to, really to get the attention they deserve. And so I know persecution is a hard topic to talk about, but you need to know. And there's some encouraging news. We're going to give you that too. Jeff, welcome to the program. Great to have you today.
Oh, Randy, it's an honor to be with you.
We look around the world. It's not always in the news, the secular news, but I mean, there's things that go on. Just give us kind of an update. What are you seeing? What's been on your heart lately?
Syria is really in play. It's in the news right now. It's not necessarily a story of great persecution right now, but what's coming might be. So there's a lot of Christians in Syria. And Randy, basically I'd say Al-Qaeda, ISIS have taken over. So the new government's called STG. The fighting force was HTS. People get lost in the alphabet soup, but this is Al-Qaeda and ISIS. They rebranded so they'd be palatable to the West, and they came out and said, we're peaceful, we're peace-loving people, and don't worry, the Christians have nothing to fear. Well, just recently, there was, about 2 weeks ago, there was a major attack, and where they went in and attacked an Alawite community. So there's some Christians, but for the most part, there's a tribe called Alawites. Bashar al-Assad was an Alawite, so the former leader of the country was part of this tribe. And so they went in and killed about 250 fighters, but 850 civilians, burned a lot of homes down, public executions, families executed, beheadings. So the irony is that, HTS, STG comes out, they take over a portion of the country and overthrow Assad after, over a decade of trying. Mm-hmm. Lots of different groups trying to force him out, including, the U.S. and Turkey and et cetera. So we're trying to force him out. It finally happens, but who's in charge? They're not in charge, but they come out and they say, we're the government. So ISIS comes out and says, we're the government. And what does the world do? The Europeans line up and say, oh, welcome to the stage of world politics. How can we help? You probably need support. And I think even certain U.S. officials were talking about the same thing, offering support. So just madness. These guys are radical jihadists. So a very frightening development. And there are a whole bunch of Christians in harm's way. And so there's some things baking in the background. Obviously can't say anything about it, but in the future I might come back and have some interesting news for you.
Yeah, and when the political situation, with Russia backing Assad and the United States opposing that, and you got a lot going on.
Yeah.
And you and I both know
Yeah.
anytime you get these power struggles going on, whether it's on a small scale or a global scale, like kind of in Syria in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
it's always the people, the civilians, just the ordinary guy trying to feed his family, that takes the brunt of it. They're lost in it. What can be done? Is there anything the average person can do? Yes, we know we're going to pray, and
Yeah.
I don't want to downplay that. I don't think we can underestimate the power of that. But I mean,
Yeah.
is there anything else we can do to I don't know. I say raise
Yeah.
awareness. That sounds weak as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
What do we do, right?
Well, I'd say, first of all, that people should be writing and calling the representatives their offices and expressing concern and asking for protection of the Christians. This is huge. So Marco Rubio would be very in favor of that. President
Mm-hmm.
Trump would be very in favor of that. Plenty of politicians would, but they need to hear from the people too. They like to stay in power, and that means votes. And so they like to please those who put them there, um, apart from any intrinsic motivation. So that would be the first thing. And the other one is to just provide financial support. Now, that's a little dicey right now. Like we've worked in Syria for a long time. Maybe I'm terrible at dates. Maybe it's a decade. But everything is very problematic now. So there's lots of people that kind of jump on the bandwagon when you have something that's really in play in the news. You just have to be able to do something on the ground. And I'm trying to think how to say it with our organization. So our former machine mostly has broken down, but there's some other things brewing. And so right now, I wouldn't call out for financial support for us.
Mm-hmm.
It remains to be seen if we can do some things. Um, but anybody if they're actually doing work on the ground, right, which again, very problematic, as you can
Mm-hmm.
imagine, then get behind them.
Yeah, I mean, we're in the same boat. We don't have anybody in Syria,
Yeah.
and so yeah, you do feel a little strapped sometimes.
Yeah.
Sideways question, a little bit, if you don't mind, because in my recent trip to South Sudan,
Yeah.
we stayed at the World Food Program compound for a few nights. Got
Wow.
to talk to a lot of UN people. Of course, at the airports, you got the big UN helicopters. It was wild because there were Ukraine helicopters and Russian engineers in the same place, and you're like, okay,
God.
I know, right? So,
Mm.
but very interesting. But in talking to them, there is a concern because a lot of the World Food Program, they actually offer a lot of our missionary support in the field because you know how it is out there, Wild West. Sometimes you need
Yeah.
a place to stay, you need some
Yeah. Yeah.
assistance, you might need a flight or something like that.
Yeah.
And with the USAID cuts, and I can't even really ascertain where that's at because the Supreme Court overruled
Yeah.
what Trump had done. Is the money going out? I think it is, but it can have a real impact, even just a gap, even if they're going to clean it up, which I'm all for 100%
Yeah.
because there's so much corruption in all of that. You
Yes.
hate to see that,
100%.
but you also hate to
Yeah.
see it come to a complete halt. And I know this also would impact Christians in persecuted places. Do you have
It's
any?
affected our funding. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have any insight into even that situation? Because I can even go. I don't even know. I wish it was the church doing all this, not the government. Anyway, but this is where we're at, and I don't know. There's a lot right now up in the air.
Yeah. And I would say I'm not sure I've got insight. I've got an opinion. And I would welcome a greater, probably like you, the more oversight and auditing of the U.S. government, the better. Oh my gosh, that should not be a political issue. That's just be aware of how governments work and how wasteful they are, left and right, doesn't matter. So auditing and and shutting things down, absolutely needed. Now, I think you'd probably say, but it feels a little bit like the baby with the bathwater on
Yeah.
this one.
Yep.
There's a lot of good work they do, and some of it, you think about part of what USAID is doing is offering influence. So we're purchasing influence, we're providing funds for lots of different things, and that means when there's problems, we can pick up the phone
Hmm.
and to
That's
the
right.
politician or whoever, and some of that money is being siphoned off, frankly, and that's how it works all over the world. And then those politicians are, putting their kids in Western schools and buying villas at the sea and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But that means when we pick up the phone, something happens. So, anyways, that's a convoluted answer, but
I
that's how
know
I look at it.
it's a big issue, and I want to keep it at the forefront because we
Yeah.
need to keep pressure because waste should be eliminated, and frankly,
Yeah.
corruption should be prosecuted in my mind
Yeah.
because
Yeah. Absolutely.
you clean that up, and actually you'll give more aid to people that need it. Okay,
That's right.
so and South Sudan. There's a lot of fighting. It was a little dicey over there, but it's tribal infighting. It's not actual persecution like it would be
Yeah.
in like Sudan. But I know there's some
Right.
other countries in Africa that still are really hot places where Christians
Oh,
are being specifically targeted.
yeah.
What are you seeing?
I always point people to Nigeria. I mean, I'm pretty sure you're up to speed on it, but for the listeners, it's just an unbelievable situation. So in the last 20 years in Nigeria, you've probably seen 100,000 Christians killed. There's it's not an official number, but there's a number that's always batted around of how many Christians have been killed.
Hmm.
And strangely, so I've been doing this for 20 some years, and strangely, this number never goes up, although I'm watching attacks all the time.
Hmm.
So I say it's probably near 100,000. So, like I said, it's gone on for 20 years, and the government can never seem to do anything about it. They're just powerless, seemingly. They don't go after the attackers. The attacks on Christians happen right next to army bases,
Hmm.
right next to army outposts. Nothing, police, nothing. And here's the upshot of all of it is that this is my point of view, and pretty much any Christian in Nigeria will tell you this, that there's a deep state. There's an Islamist deep state running Nigeria. So they're in control of intel, police, and army. So nothing ever happens. Now, the few times you want to see something happen, if some Christians get some guns and start shooting back. So we've seen helicopter gunships from the government go right out and shoot up the village. That's telling. So, anyways, but you can see this pattern. All they do is they come to the United States and say, "Gosh, this is such a tough war. It's a guerrilla war. These guys are in the bush. Can we get a couple $1 billion for military aid so we can go after these guys?" And we're like, "Yeah, boy, that would be a great thing. Here's a billion." Maddening. That's corruption on another level. It's stupidity on our part because we haven't woken up. But it is a horrendous situation. There's 100,000 and 3.5 million Christian farmers have had their lands stolen. Three and a half.
Jeez.
And so it's a stealth jihad and a slow-moving genocide. It's unbelievable. So they're emptying the middle part of the country. They push the Christians out of the north, and then there's the middle, which is the agrarian farmland, and they're emptying it of Christians and taking over. And our government seems to not be able to do anything. Although I think Mr. Trump is going to do something here. He's talking about putting them on the CP. Applying diplomatic pressure without getting into all the detail. So that's Nigeria.
Yeah, jeez. Oh, so is that are Muslims, radical Muslims, the force behind most of the persecution around the world, or at least in Africa, all of Africa, in the Middle
Yeah.
East? I mean, is that really what we're facing? Is Islam?
Yeah, I think so. I often describe it this way. So back in the day, the most of the persecution was coming from the communist world. And now, most of the communist states have fallen apart, and most of them aren't even really communist anymore. They're run by mafias, and it's all about power and control and money. China is probably different, but that was back in the day. So think back to listeners of a certain age. Think back to the 70s and the 80s, and you remember the oil shocks, where the Arabs, doubled, tripled, quadrupled the price of oil. The wealth of the world, Randy, it started to pour in to Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states. I mean, unimaginable levels. And they use that money. Now, the Saudis see themselves as the keeper of Islam. So the Muslims go on a Hajj. They visit Mecca within Saudi Arabia. They are the keepers. It was where it was birthed, and they're the keepers and protectors. And so they use that money to radicalize the world's mosques and imams, their pastors. They built terror organizations everywhere. They funded, they seeded them. They radicalized the schools and created tons of youth schools where kids are trained for really fighting. They memorize the Quran and they learn how to fight. So this has happened for 30 years. And when you start to see the terror attacks, maybe in about the 80s, that's where it's coming from. That's the story today. So you look around the world and we're still dealing with it constantly.
Yeah. We flew, you get the little map on the airplanes on those long flights. We flew right over Mecca. I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. There it is. And, I will say this. We got a mosque 2 doors down from us.
Yeah.
They're peaceful people. So we got to be careful when we talk about Islam to paint them all
Yeah,
with this
yeah,
broad
yeah.
brush. Even the difference between Saudi Arabia and like Iran,
Yes.
they're,
Yeah.
they're not friendly. But yet, here's the crazy thing. I am getting a lot of great reports. So you want some good news?
Yeah.
Out of Iran.
Yeah.
The underground church growing. I mean,
Yeah.
some really miraculous things like Jesus showing up in dreams for people and they're not even sure who
Yes.
he is, but then they
Yeah.
find out who he is. Are you hearing
Yeah.
good things from Iran?
Oh my gosh, it's just such an amazing story. Um, I'll go back and give you a personal story from a number of years back, but we were working with pastors from inside the country, and you pull them out and you let them worship freely together and love on each other, and then you love on them, and you boost them up theologically, and then they go back into the lion's den. And one of the pastors, he had the funniest story. He's like, it's so funny. The American pastors come over and they say, "Hey, here's how to do evangelism," because somehow we're experts on evangelism, which the church doesn't really do here, or discipleship. But anyways, they come over and offer how to do evangelism, and he'd be like, "No, no, no, that's not how we do it." He says, "Here's how I do it." So I go to a party, and then I stand up and say, "Hey, everybody, I'm a Christian. If you'd like to talk about Jesus, I'll be in the back corner. Come talk to me." And he said, then I'm mobbed for 3, 4, 5 hours. And I just tell them about Jesus. So take that little picture and multiply that times, a million. And the scripture says that in the end days that Iran would really turn to the Lord. His seat would be there. And so you think about the Ayatollahs. What did they do? The Ayatollahs, the original Ayatollah was a complete radical Islamist. He said, look, we're going to bring Islam to the world, and we're going to do it through Iran. We're going to be a proper Islamic state, and we're going to export it to the world. We're going to see the whole world conquered. And you gave it a couple of years, and the people are like, well, we got some tweaks. We got to tweak this system. It's a little messy, and go forward another 5 years. And they'd say, well, nah, we need new leaders. Go forward another 5 years. We need a new government. Go forward another 5 years, 10 years. And what they said, we need a new religion. Islam is the problem. And so now the mosques are empty, except for the old. The mosques are empty. And people see, Islam as violent, corrupt. Their leaders are absolutely corrupt. They're brutal towards their own people. And so when you are living in that kind of darkness, the man with the candle, everyone will gather around.
Yeah, right.
And in the desert, the one who has the canteen, everyone will gather around. That's the story of the church in Iran.
I love it. And so, yeah, let's keep praying. It's funny because politically we talk about, our enemies, and you got Russia, you got China, kind of North Korea and Iran. And it's like, I mean, obviously the government, right? But man, from a biblical perspective of, God making us a kingdom of every tribe and every nation, we have so many brothers and sisters in Iran. And I just, I do pray for Iran. And all the others. It's a beautiful thing when you consider the kingdom aspect of Christianity. I want to show people real quick. This is your podcast, Faith Under Fire. Yeah. And that's I love that you just keep talking about this. so don't stop. But I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Because this shouldn't just be something we talk about what's going on over there. We really, I think if we treat it properly, we can learn some things from those who are suffering. Hopefully that would enrich us spiritually as we pray for them, as we look for ways to help them. What are some of the lessons you've taken away in all of your work dealing with these persecuted areas?
Well, give me an hour or two and I can explain all of it.
I'll give you a
But
podcast. How's that?
I'll try to go short here. Let's see how I can pull this off. But Randy, when I was called through a miraculous dream to come to ICC, it was never my choice. I was like, what a curious thing, Lord. Why do you have me here? Because I was really an evangelist. That's my wiring, an evangelist at heart. And I want to see the gospel go out. I want to bring the dead to life, and I want to bring the living to the deep. So anyways, he assigned me here. I'm like, okay. And then whispering to me over and over, I want you to listen to the lessons of the persecuted church. They are transformative. I want you to shout them to the world. So listen, learn, shout. And I'm like, okay, I'm ready. Here we go. So I'll figure it out. And then next week I'll start shouting. Randy, I gotta tell you, it was like over a decade, maybe 15 years, really before it got really clear. But soon after that, I go to China. And I asked for meetings with Chinese pastors who had suffered long prison terms. So I sit with a group, and the shortest sentence 10, longest sentence 24 years. And oh my gosh, what a life treasure to sit with them. And I'll tell you the last thing. They just said persecution was a gift. My eyebrow went up.
Right.
And they said it's not one you give, it's not one you want, but it's a gift because it keeps the church pure. And there's so much below that and around that statement. And then here's a corollary statement they said. I said, what's your biggest worry? And they said, our biggest worry is that the guys that we're mentoring, the guys and gals in the church we're mentoring that are coming up after us, because these guys were older, they said they haven't been hunted and tortured and murdered like we were. They said, that's our biggest worry. So that just rattled around my brain. It's like, my gosh, and all this is deeply sincere. I'm at heart, I'm kind of a marketing guy, and I was like, is this marketing spin? What is this? I'm like, no,
it's not.
And so then I learned over time. I saw it because the Lord said, "Listen, learn, and shout." That's my phrasing. And then I saw it. So the persecuted are in their own prisons, right? But in any pew, if I speak in a church, in any pew, there's someone in one of these prisons: cancer, bankruptcy, divorce, anxiety, depression. And these are all prisons, probably no less damaging. And these things are meant that the process of suffering that the persecuted go through or that we go through, there's supposed to be a door of transformation. The Lord is trying to use that as a tool to get you to where he wants to go, and you can't get there on your own. And so we have to go through the crucible of suffering. And plus the world is just fallen, okay? It's just broken. Everything is broken. But there is a point so often to our suffering, and he's trying to get you to walk through a door of transformation.
Yeah. And, we don't always like that, especially in some of the church culture where any kind of hardship is viewed as either just, an attack of the enemy or a failing of my own faith. And it's like, no, Jesus suffered more than any of us. And we're not Jesus.
You run into the too blessed to be stressed.
Right.
Run into that element. You're like, oh my gosh.
And the beautiful thing is a lot of times in our prayers, we're like, God, where are you? But God is near the brokenhearted. And
Amen.
If you're suffering, you know what?
Yeah.
That's a guarantee of God's presence. So we got to shift, I think, our view a little bit.
And I bet you would say that you look back in your life and the moments of deepest suffering were probably when you were closest.
Yeah.
Not all the time, but often.
Well, and you talk to people in places that have suffered tremendously. That's what they say every time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. You mentioned ICC, International Christian Concern. That's a parent organization. And right here is the website, persecution.org. And they have up there the ICC 2025 Global Persecution Index. So, I would encourage people to follow up with this for all the reasons that Jeff talks about, your own awareness, but also you'll have a prayer list. But also you'll get the lessons, that we can learn as we seek to lessen the suffering. Because,
Yeah.
It's a bit of a paradox because yes, we suffer, but we're also meant to help others in their suffering.
Amen.
So don't want to forget all that. I mean, I just
That's good.
I could sit just the rest of the day, but I will respect your time as well as the audience.
Yeah.
Where do you want to leave people when we talk about this?
Oh, I would go back to that point. I think I'm always saying the listen, learn, and shout. And what is the Lord doing? Think about think about Iran. And I'll tell you what, like I said, when you do persecution ministry for 20 some years, you can get pretty depressed. You just see the worst of the worst.
Right.
And very discouraging too. You look around the world and we are sheep among wolves and we're being devoured all the time. Look at the church in our own country. It's just on the defensive. It's weak.
Yeah.
And so I'd look around and think about that. And then over time, I saw it. And I saw this process of what happens with persecution, what happens with suffering. It drives us to the Lord. Our suffering, we have to allow it to drive us to the Lord. We go deep. And again, that same thing. The one who has the candle in the dark, who has the canteen in the desert. This is why the church grows. And it grows, not every time in every instance of persecution or the murder of a Christian, but you pull back in all of history and right now, you can't miss it. Oh my gosh. And so there's a lesson for you, believers. So first of all, follow the persecuted. They're the deepest Christians on earth. That's where you're going to sit at the feet of the masters. But to understand this role of suffering in your life and to say, there so often is a point to it. Now, some of the times we just need to hug each other and weep together because this is the vale of tears we are passing through. But so often, the Lord is trying to do something and to take you somewhere that you can't get to on your own.
Well said. Well said. Whew. Okay, there you go, people. I would encourage you to hit the share button and just let others know. This is something, we need to go right into this and say, God, we know you're here. We want to be a part of it. So again, thank you, Jeff. I appreciate you very much.
Always a blessing to be with you.
Absolutely. Check out Faith Under Fire with Jeff King and come back. We'll see you again next time on Life Today Live.
Believe on the God who for Christ's sake justifies the ungodly.